Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, September 10th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Gallup polling and their brand new poll in relation to party affiliation nationwide, showing Vice President Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, driving Democratic Party affiliation higher to a point that we have seen ever in this 2024 election season. The Democratic Party has been in a state where over the past 2 months really, with Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee and practically a whole new and revitalized electorate and new and revitalized election season, the Democratic Party has been looking at the up and up and seeing how they can make improvements under the guidance and leadership of Vice President Kamala Harris. And we saw it in terms of fundraising numbers. We saw a surge of enthusiasm in terms of how were people spending their money, how they were donating to Kamala Harris's campaign, raising over $500 million in just under a month. Fast forward to the time at which we started to see more and more people sign up for volunteer shifts, more people get employed by the Kamala Harris campaign, new excitement, new thrills, new exhilaration types for Kamala Harris that did not exist and was not part of a factor of the Biden election up until the time at which Biden dropped out of the race, in which we saw people come out of the woodworks in favor of Kamala Harris. And this did translate to significant gains when it came down to battleground states. And of course, on the national average, the day that Biden dropped out of the race, Donald Trump led him by 3.1%. Today, Kamala Harris leads nationwide in over a 4-point shift since Biden's dropout. Not to mention, in the battleground states on average, Kamala Harris takes the lead in almost every single battleground state in recent polls and is just in less than half a point margin of victory in North Carolina and Georgia, which currently have Donald Trump ahead very narrowly. She's tied in Pennsylvania on the Real Clear Politics average, which already skews to the right. Kamala Harris ahead in Michigan, Wisconsin, and the state of Nevada, a state that Donald Trump maintained 5 6-point leads in against Biden. Now Kamala Harris has that advantage and overall on the net leads by 0.2%. And you can see the massive change in direction when Donald Trump led Joe Biden on average across these battleground states by 4.4%. Today, Kamala Harris takes the lead. And this consistent trend line, I think what we've seen is that Kamala Harris is boosting Democratic Party enthusiasm. She's giving Democrats an excitement factor that Democrats could not and did not rely on in the 2024 election because Joe Biden could not drive voters out in the same way that Kamala Harris could. And while this election is very much still a toss-up, Kamala Harris puts it back in play versus after the debate, you saw my own election prediction had Joe Biden having the worst performance for a Democratic nominee in the 21st century, lagging behind that of John Kerry, Al Gore, and even Secretary Hillary Clinton. And so Kamala Harris now beating Donald Trump when it comes down to excitement, beating Donald Trump when it comes down to playing political hardball, doing things right, doing the right advertisements, doing the right moves, doing the right maneuvering in the American political system. Kamala Harris gaining momentum, Democrats hoping it could expand and mobilize voters, and what we are finding today, Gallup, which does a lot of polls, and they did them and have done them for decades on end, that gives us general indications of how this nation might vote. Back in 2020, we found that right at the end of the election and on average across the year 2020, the Democratic Party and Democratic leaners together, because not everyone affiliates as a political party. There are a third of this nation that identifies as independents who, when push comes to shove, they do choose a side. And according to Gallup, in the 2020 election year, Democrats had an advantage of 5 points, very similar to that of the 2016 election when it fluctuated between 4 to 5 points. So Democrats were in a very similar place of 2016 and 2020 when it came down to party affiliation. And so our metric here is to take a look at, is this where we are today? Because if it is so, that's a good sign for Kamala Harris. But it isn't just that Kamala Harris is driving this election enthusiasm into turnout in terms of how people are identifying. We are finding that voters are very excited about Vice President Kamala Harris. And when you take a look too, generally speaking, about where people are when it comes down to this election, in terms of party affiliation trends, overall, 39% of the nation identifies as independent. Democrats at 31%, up 3 points from July when Biden was the nominee. I mean, it was polled literally the days July 1st through the day Biden dropped out of the race. Republicans at 30, maintaining that. Independents went down, more people moving over to the Democratic side. But what's more interesting is that when voters are being pushed, when party identifiers and leaners are pushed together, who do you identify more with, Democrats or Republicans? Democrats maintain this advantage of 3 points, which means we are a little bit behind where it was in 2020, but far ahead of where it was in July of 2024, which leaves room for growth for Kamala Harris, in which growth we have seen quite significantly across this country. Republicans at 46%, down from 48 in June, down from 47 in July. Democrats went from 45, dropped to 41 after the debate. Back up to a new high of 49%. The last time we saw it this high, 49%, we can go back. Let's go ahead and see if we find the last time it was at 49% or higher. Not even in November, not even in a time frame where Democrats were really hoping that they could maximize turnout in 2022. Democrats are at a higher point now than they were ever in 2022. And the interesting thing is, too, while the lead may be smaller rather, for Democrats against Republicans, both parties are now at a higher point for a variety of different reasons, but Democrats are getting closer and closer to that majority number, that 49% that they had in 96 when they won over 350 electoral votes. Over 49%, which is what they had in 2008 when they had 52% when they won over 350 electoral votes. Even in 2012, the numbers for Democrats were at just 47%, and the advantage there was around 3 to 4 points, roughly similar to where we are today. And so in terms of margin here, Republicans have gained ground. But in terms of overall percent party affiliation, Democrats have gained ground. And it comes at a time where Democrats, you can see that under this Biden campaign, from the moment he launched back in 2023, from then on, 44, 47, 43, 40, 43, 46, 42, 44, 43, 41, 40, 46, 46, 46, 45, 40, 48. High number, the debate happened. 45, 41, 49. And so Kamala Harris seems to completely revitalized this Democratic campaign. And in terms of how people perceive the nation, voters have left the Republican Party in terms of who they affiliate with. I mean, you have 2% of the electorate, and I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but we remember that 90% of this electorate was going to vote the way they were going to vote no matter what happened, no matter who Kamala Harris chose as VP, no matter if Joe Biden was in the race or not, no matter if Donald Trump had dropped out of that. So many different circumstances, 45% on both sides was going to come in regardless. 90% of this nation was going to vote the way they were going to vote, no matter how many things changed between now and November, between January 1st and November. And so the fact is that on the margins, where it matters amongst independents, Republicans are losing ground consistently. A percent could ultimately add up to an election loss. Democrats have gained 8 points in just under a month, largely, and I would even say all because of Kamala Harris's candidacy at the top of the ticket. They even recognize that too, that Democrats are driving this surge in election enthusiasm, right? Republicans have had that. That's been their argument. We are excited about Donald Trump. You are not excited about Joe Biden. We are excited about J.D. Vance. You are not excited about Kamala Harris. But then, when Kamala Harris came to the top of the ticket, what we are finding here is that 80% of Democrats say they are more enthusiastic than usual about voting. And after Roe v. Wade was overturned, we found out that the most likely group to vote, and we are seeing this in the likely voter screens, are now voters that are more likely to vote Democrat. Prior to the 2020 election, the case was that Republicans would do better amongst likely voter screens. Historically, what we've known, and if you took a high school civics class, you know this, that voters that are more Republican are white voters, older voters, wealthier voters, which just so happen to be the most likely group to vote, suburban voters, right? The most likely demographics to vote. However, in this election and in the 2022 midterms, we started to see a bit of a change here, where now Democrats ended up moving into that most likely to vote category because they had something to continuously vote for and push away from the Republican Party on, and that was the issue of abortion. And so now let's go ahead and unpack this surge in enthusiasm because it has been translating to very positive results when it comes down to party affiliation. But when it comes down to enthusiasm too, you can see massive improvements. So in terms of changes in election enthusiasm, at face value, just 55% of Democrats in 2024 in March said they were more enthusiastic than usual. And this actually makes a bit of sense, right? There were a lot of Democrats out there that were really trying to defeat Donald Trump. And so that excitement came from this idea that they could do this again. Republicans had 59%. Republicans now have 64%, an improvement of 5 points. Democrats have seen an improvement of 23 points since the last time we saw that question asked in March, right? 55 to 78%, massive change, a 23-point gain for the Democratic Party. Republicans gained just 5. And you can see, too, enthusiasm in presidential election years. On the overall electorate, this seems to be the highest point we have seen across the nation dating back to any election in the 21st century. This is the highest point we have seen. Both sides very thrilled and enthusiastic about voting, but largely this being driven by the Democratic Party. And when you take a look, too, in terms of party enthusiasm, the Democratic Party outpaces the Republican, as we already saw the Republican enthusiasm factor here. 64% of Republicans and Republican leaders say they're more enthusiastic than normal. Democrats, however, are at 78%. Back in 2020, things seemed to be very different, but by the time the election came around, Democrats had that advantage. Back in 2016, however, by the time we reached the election, Republicans had that advantage. In 2012, we saw on Election Day, Republicans also had that advantage, but it didn't end up working out. And so all these are not perfect indicators. The fact remains, Democrats are at the highest point they have ever reached as a party in terms of enthusiasm in the 2024 election than in any other election prior, Democrats only rivaling the 2008 presidential election. And so a lot of this enthusiasm by the Democratic Party is really being driven by Kamala Harris, right? Thinking about how they view the race, thinking about how they are excited about this race. The Democratic Party has been in a position where months prior to Kamala Harris's candidacy, they were seeing enthusiasm fade off. After the State of the Union and after months of campaigning from Joe Biden, they were losing the war on the narrative. The media was hounding on Joe Biden. He wasn't doing the interviews with the New York Times, and so they went on the complete offense against him, and so many other publications really twisted the knife after that presidential debate, which we can say, even looking at it from the perspective of the Democratic campaign, Joe Biden himself said it was a terrible night. And it will largely be seen in history as one of the most consequential presidential debates because we have never had a presidential debate that has ultimately led to a candidate withdrawing from the race. At the same time, was the fallout as big as it was made to seem? Maybe not, right? Donald Trump did end up improving nationally, but only by 2 to 3 points nationwide. The idea that Joe Biden would have been doomed in the presidential election, he probably would have lost the presidential election, and I did think he was going to lose in the immediate aftermath of the debate, but it wasn't going to be this massive 400 electoral vote landslide like everybody was making it out to seem. However, that isn't to say that Kamala Harris's candidacy wasn't the right choice. Very clearly, it was the right choice. And the trajectory of this race has changed in a very positive direction for the Democratic Party, and it is still close. We were going to talk about this yesterday, but we got flooded out by a bunch of new national polls. The New York Times and Siena College poll, one of the most respected pollsters in the nation yesterday, came out with a data point that said 2 days ago, Kamala Harris is losing nationally by 1 point. Now, here's where I throw this in. Back in July, they said the same thing. They had the same metrics, but their swing state polls show Kamala Harris ahead. And that's where I really find problem with some of these national data points that say Donald Trump is going to do better nationally than he is statewide. Because I did think that was going to be the case in the Biden versus Trump matchup. But I don't think will necessarily be the case today. And I think we will find that by Election Day, Kamala Harris wins the national popular vote by 2, 3, 4, 5 points, depending on the margin of victory. And that could translate to a down ballot victory. But I don't believe that she's going to be winning Pennsylvania by 3, like some polls suggest, and the same poll comes around and says Donald Trump wins nationwide. I don't think that's going to be the case, and I don't think there's any historical precedent for that in Republicans ever in modern American history. Ever being underestimated on the national level and overestimated on the statewide level. Unless it comes down to midterms where we could see some interesting arguments being made, but I want to go ahead and focus back on this point from Gallup, because what we are seeing is this enthusiasm could very much drive Democrats in these battleground states and, of course, on the national level. This explains why Kamala Harris is doing far better than that of Joe Biden and why there is room for improvement for Kamala Harris. Today is debate day. I forgot about that. Today is debate day. We are going to be seeing a lot of new narrative from this debate depending on who wins, on who loses, and we'll see in the immediate aftermath of who says whoever wins, right? That's where we are. Point being, though, Kamala Harris has done something for this party that Democrats have been dying to see. They have been in a position where they have been so worried about how this election was going to go that they did not even think for a moment that they would be even enthusiastic about this race. Democrats looked at this race with peril. They felt like they were slow walking into a second Trump presidency, and for a while, it did seem like that. The way the media was talking about the race, the way the polls were coming out against the Democratic Party, and even the Gallup poll that showed the party affiliation numbers dropped tremendously for Democrats. A 4-point decline. Republicans saw a decline, but it was 1 point. Now they saw an additional 1 point decline on the GOP side, but Democrats gaining 8 points is even more of an indicator of how powerful Kamala Harris is as a candidate and what she has done for the Democratic Party. And while this race, and I will say it a million times, is far from over and absolutely still a toss-up, And even the Kamala Harris campaign views themselves as the underdogs in this race. They weren't even major players after that debate. They were still in a position where they could have won, but they were not major players, and that's a big deal that Democrats are now. And Democrats are excited now, and Democrats are enthusiastic now, because this election could have gone much more poorly for Democrats, and now they have a very good shot at victory, even higher than any point under Joe Biden from the moment he announced his candidacy up until today. And so Kamala Harris at this point, with a newfound surge of enthusiasm from the Democratic base, we are now seeing it translated into how people identify and which party they affiliate with, which is a very good sign for the Democratic Party, with an 8-point gain in just under a month. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.